Rome, October of the year 54 AD. The imperial palace is silent after an intimate banquet. Emperor Claudius, 64 years old, retires satisfied after savoring his favorite dish, mushrooms in sauce. No one suspects that this meal will mark the end of his life and open the door to one of the most disturbing reigns in the empire. Because that night, it was not fate that decided, but the calculated ambition of a woman, Julia Agrippina the Younger. Many remember this episode as the simple poisoning of Claudius, but the true darkness began afterward. Agrippina did not just eliminate her husband, the most disturbing part was what she did to maintain power, manipulate her own son, Nero, turning him into an instrument of her will. This story is not just another chronicle of palace intrigue. It is the tale of how a woman born into the imperial family learned from childhood that in Rome, survival belonged to those who struck first. A woman who transformed tragedy into ambition, seduction into a weapon, and politics into a deadly game. Chroniclers Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio describe her acts with a mix of fascination and horror. They agree on one thing: no Roman woman had ever achieved so much power, nor had fallen so deeply into infamy. Here begins the story of an empress who turned ambition into poison and power into her only faith. If you are drawn to the dark secrets of Rome, this is the moment to support the channel. Leave your like and subscribe so you don't miss the most hidden episodes of the empire. Thus begins the life of Agrippina the Younger, the woman who poisoned Rome. Agrippina the Younger was born on November 6, 15 AD, in Germania, into a family destined for greatness and misfortune. Her father was Germanicus, the most admired general of his time, adored by the legions and seen as the natural heir to power. But his brilliance aroused the suspicions of Emperor Tiberius. When Agrippina was only 4 years old, Germanicus died under mysterious circumstances during a campaign in the east. Many believed he had been poisoned. The tragedy did not end there. Her mother, Agrippina the Elder, granddaughter of Augustus himself, publicly defied Tiberius seeking justice. That boldness cost her dearly. She was arrested and exiled, where she died of starvation. 2 of her children suffered the same fate. Only Agrippina and her brother Gaius survived, the latter later known as Caligula. In that childhood, young Agrippina learned the harshest lesson of Roman power: the family could be your shield, or your doom. 1.2 The first marriage, violence and calculation. At 13, she was married off to Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, a much older man, brutal and reputedly cruel. It was not a marriage of love, but of political convenience, as was customary among the aristocracy. Young Agrippina experienced domestic violence and humiliation, but she also understood that every alliance, no matter how painful, could be used as a stepping stone. From this union, a son was born, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who would later be known as Nero. For Agrippina, this child was not just her offspring. He was the key to absolute power. From the day of his birth, she considered him her most ambitious political project. Fate took a turn in the year 37, when her brother Caligula ascended to the throne. Suddenly, Agrippina found herself at the very heart of the empire. Caligula was unpredictable, capable of showing affection one moment and ordering capricious executions the next. His obsession with his sisters, including Agrippina, scandalized Rome. For her, it was a brutal period of learning. She had to measure every word, read every gesture, and use her charm as a weapon to survive. Her closeness to Caligula granted her privileges, but also enemies. Soon she was accused of conspiracy and ended up in exile. There, far from the luxuries of the palace, she forged her philosophy of life: power is not requested, it is seized, and to keep it, any means are valid. After the fall and assassination of Caligula, the throne passed to his uncle, Claudius. Agrippina returned to Rome with a single-minded determination: she would never again be a passive piece on the board of power. She had watched her mother die in exile, endured a violent marriage, and suffered the whims of a mad brother. Now, she was ready to transform all that pain into ambition. Agrippina understood better than anyone how the game worked. Rome did not reward virtue, but cunning. Men in power could be controlled with three invisible weapons: fear, seduction, and manipulation. And she was preparing to use them all. Agrippina had survived family tragedies, the violence of a husband, and the reign of a tyrannical brother. Now, with a son who represented her greatest political bet, she was ready to return to the center of power. But to conquer Rome, she first had to destroy the most dangerous woman in the empire, Messalina, the wife of Emperor Claudius. When Agrippina returned to Rome, the palace already had a queen, Valeria Messalina, Claudius's wife. Young, beautiful, and powerful, Messalina had earned a reputation for cruelty and licentiousness. She ruled through fear, eliminated rivals without hesitation, and had turned the palace into a stage of excess. Many feared her, but she had also accumulated a long list of enemies ready to exploit any mistake. That mistake came in the year 48. While Claudius was away from Rome, Messalina committed the unthinkable. She publicly married a young senator named Gaius Silius, an act seen as an attempted coup. The news exploded like a bomb across Rome. The emperor, betrayed by his own wife, reacted with fury. He ordered the immediate execution of Messalina and Silius. The throne of empress was now vacant. And Agrippina understood that this void was the opportunity of a lifetime. Claudius was a peculiar man. At first glance, he seemed weak, stammering, lame, timid. He had come to the throne almost by accident after Caligula's assassination. But beneath that appearance was a scholarly mind and a politician far sharper than many believed. Agrippina knew she could not conquer him like Messalina had, with ostentation and scandal. Her strategy would be different. She would present herself as the perfect alternative. In public, she always appeared sober and elegant, in modest dresses and measured gestures. She presented herself as a devoted mother, a respectable widow, and a prudent woman. Privately, she cultivated Claudius's trust intelligently. They spoke of family history, politics, and Rome. She offered him what he most needed: respect and sincere admiration, or at least the illusion of it. Agrippina did not rush. First, she became an advisor, then a confidant. And slowly, she let the closeness become something more intimate. Her son, Nero, played a key role. He was presented as a promising, charismatic young man, ideal to inherit the empire. In doing so, she seduced Claudius not just as a woman, but as a mother who brought the future with her. There was one problem: Agrippina was Claudius's niece. Marriage between uncle and niece was prohibited by Roman law, considered incestuous. But Agrippina knew no limits. She moved influence in the Senate, used bribes and favors, and pressured until the senators agreed to change the law. The marriage took place in 49, with all imperial pomp. Officially, Rome had a new empress. In practice, something far more unsettling was born: a woman who did not want to be the emperor's shadow, but the real power behind the throne. Agrippina did not waste time. Unlike previous imperial wives, she did not limit herself to influencing from behind the scenes. She sat beside Claudius at council meetings, appeared by his side at official audiences, and was even depicted on imperial coins, as if she ruled alongside him. It was unprecedented. Rome saw a woman sharing the stage of power. But the most important change was succession. Claudius had a legitimate son, Britannicus, from his marriage to Messalina. Agrippina knew that as long as Britannicus lived, her plan was at risk. So she convinced Claudius to officially adopt her son Nero, giving him the name Nero Claudius Caesar Drusus Germanicus. The adoption, combined with Nero's marriage to Octavia, Claudius's daughter, ensured that her son would become the natural heir to the throne, displacing Britannicus. Meanwhile, anyone who could challenge that succession disappeared: false accusations, exiles, and discreet executions. One of the most remembered cases was that of Domitia Lepida, Nero's aunt, accused of witchcraft and executed. In just a few years, Agrippina had gone from exile to becoming the most powerful figure in the empire. The Senate feared her, courtiers flattered her, and Claudius seemed increasingly dependent on her. But Agrippina's success brought with it an inevitable danger: Claudius began to realize how much control he had lost. And in the palace corridors, he started murmuring something that would be fatal for her, the idea of returning the succession to Britannicus. The empress had played the game to perfection. She had seduced Claudius, changed the law, and secured the succession for her son. But in Rome, power was never eternal. Claudius was beginning to have doubts, and Agrippina knew that in the imperial court, doubt had only one solution: poison. Agrippina's plan seemed perfect. Nero was already the official heir, Octavia, Claudius' daughter, was his fiancée, and Britannicus had been sidelined. But the emperor was starting to open his eyes. Over the months, Claudius regained some autonomy and began to express doubts in private. According to chroniclers, he even said, "May the gods forgive me, but perhaps I have chosen the wrong successor. Britannicus is my true son, and he must rule." For Agrippina, those words were a death sentence. If Claudius acted, she would not only lose power but also be exposed to the vengeance of those she had eliminated during her rise. Agrippina turned to a specialist, Locusta, the most feared poisoner in Rome. Of Gallic origin, she had perfected the art of killing without leaving a trace. Together, they devised a meticulous plan. The poison chosen came from the Amanita phalloides, the death cap. Its effects were almost impossible to detect, mimicked a natural illness, and proved fatal within hours. The dilemma was how to bypass the emperor's personal taster. For this, Agrippina used her network of trusted slaves. The poison would not be placed in just any dish, but in Claudius' favorite, mushrooms in sauce, ensuring that he himself insisted on eating them. October 54 AD. Claudius called for an intimate banquet at the palace, attended by his family. The evening passed without incident: wine, forced laughter, political conversations. The mushroom dish was served with care. No one suspected that the tray carried the emperor's ruin. Claudius devoured it enthusiastically, oblivious to what had occurred between kitchen and table. At first, nothing seemed strange. But an hour later, the nightmare began: dizziness, abdominal pain, violent vomiting. Imperial doctors tried emergency remedies, believing it to be indigestion. Agrippina, meanwhile, played her part perfectly, concerned, attentive, anxious for her husband's health, yet silently awaiting the outcome. The agony lasted through the night. Claudius alternated between convulsions and moments of delirium. At dawn on October 13, he lost consciousness. Agrippina immediately took control of the situation. She sealed the chambers, allowed access only to trusted doctors and slaves, and sent messages to the most influential military commanders. Upon Claudius' death, Rome must recognize Nero as emperor without hesitation. By noon, the emperor was officially declared dead, apparently from natural causes related to his advanced age. The court accepted the explanation without question, at least publicly. That same day, Nero, just 17 years old, was proclaimed emperor of Rome. Agrippina presented him as the legitimate successor, ensuring that it was Claudius' wish. But everyone in the palace knew there was more behind that perfect transition. Rumors of poison began to spread like an unstoppable whisper, although no one dared confront her. Agrippina had achieved the unthinkable. In a matter of hours, she had turned her husband's murder into her son's coronation. Rome had a new emperor, but the true power remained in her hands. The most powerful woman in the empire had achieved her goal, eliminating Claudius and placing Nero on the throne. But controlling a crown-wearing teenager would not be as simple as poisoning a sick man. Agrippina was about to discover that ruling the empire through her son would be a far more dangerous game. After Claudius's death, Rome proclaimed Nero emperor at just 17 years old. Officially, he was Caesar. In practice, however, it was Agrippina who dictated the orders. She appeared alongside her son at public events, accompanied him to Senate meetings, and even received foreign ambassadors. Rome watched, astonished, as a woman occupied spaces reserved only for emperors. Her images began circulating on imperial coins, placing her on equal footing with her son. For a brief period, Agrippina effectively ruled the empire. But Nero was no ordinary boy. Charismatic, a lover of the arts, intelligent, but also impulsive and insecure. Since childhood, he had been molded by his mother to become the centerpiece of her power plan. Agrippina did not see him as a son, but as an extension of herself. She managed his speeches, supervised his friendships, and monitored every decision he made. The young emperor lived in a gilded cage, controlled in every aspect. At first, Nero accepted this role. He was inexperienced, and his mother was the guiding figure. But gradually, the feeling of being a puppet began to stir a dangerous resentment within him. Agrippina knew that power could not be sustained by titles or laws alone, but by invisible chains. And the strongest of these chains was emotional dependence. Over the months, chroniclers recount that she began to blur the boundaries of her relationship with Nero, making him feel that no one else could understand or love him as she did. She created a bond that went beyond the maternal, using physical closeness and calculated gestures to keep him bound to her will. The result was devastating. Nero swung between blind devotion and an ever-growing resentment. The balance was shattered with the arrival of Poppaea Sabina, a woman of extraordinary beauty and ambition, capable of competing with Agrippina in manipulation. Poppaea knew exactly where to strike Nero's ego. In private conversations, she whispered to him, "You are the emperor of Rome, but you act like a child dominated by his mother. The senators mock you, the soldiers doubt your strength. How long will you remain her prisoner?" Those words poisoned Nero's mind more effectively than any poison prepared by Locusta. The young man began to see his mother not as a protector, but as a threat. The tension between mother and son grew. Agrippina tried to maintain control with reproaches, threats, and the same emotional manipulation she had always used. But now, those tactics had the opposite effect. Nero became increasingly cold, more distant. And inside, guilt and shame mingled with a growing hatred toward the woman who had put him on the throne. Agrippina, with her political instinct, noticed the change. Desperate, she even threatened Nero with publicly revealing what secretly bound them. It was her fatal mistake. With those words, she made it clear that she was no longer Nero's ally, but the greatest threat to his reign. Rome had seen emperors confront external enemies, wars, invasions, rebellions. But Nero was about to fight a far more intimate and sinister battle, the struggle against his own mother. A conflict that would culminate in one of the most infamous matricides in history. Nero did not decide to murder his mother lightly. For months, he sought a way to eliminate her without being stained. Finally, he devised a plan that seemed lifted from a Greek tragedy, a naval accident. He invited Agrippina to a reconciliation at his villa on the Bay of Naples. The gesture seemed sincere, a son attempting to restore his relationship with his mother. She accepted, though years at court had taught her to be wary. After the visit, Agrippina boarded a specially prepared ship. The mechanism was ready, part of the hull had been weakened so that it would give way in the open sea. The ship was meant to sink, and the empire would mourn the tragic loss of the empress mother. But fortune turned against Nero. Agrippina survived the shipwreck, swam to shore, and was rescued by fishermen. The message was clear: still alive, still dangerous. And now she knew, beyond doubt, that her own son wanted her dead. Nero realized he could no longer play at appearances. If he wanted to be free of his mother, he had to act brutally and directly. On the night of March 23, 59 AD, he sent a group of Praetorians commanded by Anicetus, his former tutor, with an irrevocable order: kill Agrippina. The soldiers stormed the empress's villa, where she was resting after the shipwreck. She showed neither surprise nor fear. According to the chronicles, she immediately understood that betrayal had triumphed. Before receiving the final blow, she spoke words that went down in history. "Strike here, in my womb, the one who bore Nero." She was stabbed mercilessly. Her body, according to sources, was secretly cremated that very night. Nero, for his part, announced to the people that his mother had died in an accident. Few believed the lie, but no one dared to challenge the emperor. The matricide did not bring peace to Nero. On the contrary, it marked the beginning of his downfall. The emperor began suffering from recurring nightmares. He saw his mother in his dreams, covered in blood, staring at him silently. He walked through the palace listening to her voice, convinced that her ghost was haunting him. Guilt mingled with paranoia. Nero distrusted everyone: senators, soldiers, advisors. His behavior became erratic, and Rome began to murmur that Agrippina's son had inherited not only power but also madness. Agrippina's death did not erase her influence. For years, her shadow continued to weigh on Nero. Many in Rome remembered that it was she who had placed him on the throne. Others considered her a monster whose ambition had corrupted even the most sacred bonds. The truth is that with her death, Rome lost one of the most powerful and feared female figures in its history. And Nero, freed from her control, embarked on a reign marked by excess, extravagance, and atrocities that would ultimately ruin his name and that of the entire dynasty. Thus ended the life of Julia Agrippina the Younger, a woman who defied laws, manipulated emperors, and pushed power to unprecedented limits. Her death at the hands of her own son was not just a family crime, it was a symbol of what happens when ambition knows no moral boundaries. The story of Julia Agrippina the Younger is not merely an episode of palace intrigue. It is a study of how ambition can corrupt even the most sacred bonds. She was the daughter of Germanicus, sister of Caligula, wife of Claudius, and mother of Nero. Every relationship, every tragedy, and every opportunity she used as a stepping stone toward a power that seemed unattainable for a woman in Rome. But that same power, which she gained through cunning and cruelty, ultimately consumed her. Her son, whom she made emperor, became her executioner. And the matricide, far from freeing him, marked the beginning of his ruin. The chroniclers Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio agreed on one thing: never before had a woman reached so far in Roman politics. And never before had ambition crossed so many moral boundaries. Agrippina is remembered as a brilliant strategist, but also as a symbol of the price of unchecked power. Her life leaves us with a timeless warning: when the desire to control surpasses all principles, the outcome is always self-destruction. Rome feared her, Nero betrayed her, and history turned her into one of the darkest figures of the empire. And now I ask you, was Agrippina a psychopath consumed by lust for power, or a victim of a system that offered women no other way to survive? Your opinion matters, leave it in the comments. If this story impacted you, support us with a like and subscribe to the channel to discover more tales of history's darkest secrets.